think Addie is joining us remotely as well.
Remotely, well,
Are we all set?
yes.
And we'll meet with Addie. All right. All set? So this is Senate Appropriations, and we're back with the 24 budget adjustment request. And at this point, and this will be the last for the afternoon, is the budget adjustment request from Department of Vermont Health Access. And we're lucky we have one very familiar face, still smiling. And so Stephanie, if you want to introduce yourself, and then the other people, put yourself on record as well.
Sure.
Although Stephanie, if you can't present this and need help, I will be very surprised. So,
well, I'm Stephanie Barrett, the CFO of DEVA, the Department of Vermont Health Access. And we do have Addie. I'm sorry. No, she did join us. So why don't we go to Addie next? I'm sorry.
You're next, Addie.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Good afternoon, everyone. Addie Stremlow, Acting Commissioner of the Department of Vermont Health Access. My job today is primarily one that does not need doing in introducing the rest of the team, in particular, Stephanie Barrett, our CFO, Director of the Business Office and Finance for DEVA. I know she's a familiar face around here, and we're so happy she's on our team. We also have Alicia Cooper, who's our Director of Managed Care Operations. Alicia works with our payment and reimbursement teams and can provide some support on related initiatives you'll hear about today. And then I think Alex McCracken is also in the room, our new Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs, who I think you are also familiar with. So the bulk of the presentation is going to be Stephanie's, and I will go ahead and turn it over to her. Thank you for having us.
It's all yours, Stephanie.
Okay.
Which document do we want to work with? We have two.
We have the narrative, and it might be just the easiest thing to walk through the narrative if you're curious about where it lands on the ups and downs, or if you have something that you see that you don't think you have touched on the ups and downs. But unless you would prefer to walk through the ups and downs,
It's fine.
okay.
I mean, this just parallels. This gives the information.
We just have a few, particularly in our program area, a few things that cross three appropriation lines, and we try to identify that for you when we in a summary form as we go through.
All right.
So overall, in total, all funds, all appropriations were down a little bit in this budget adjustment, but the funding sources, as we know, matter a lot. So I'm going to start in the administration budget, which is where we pay for all the people, the 380 positions in DEVA, all our operating expenses. Very small amount of grants actually come out of our admin budget. Those are mostly related to the blueprint. And then within both our personal service line and our operating line are a large variety of contracts. And that was the biggest surprise when I got to DEVA, that just how many live active agreements are in place at any given time, and how many major amendments or RFP processes are happening at any given time. And
well, the big thing about contracts is to be able to write the specifications and the contract requirements so that if a contractor doesn't perform, you've got something to enforce. And
our general counsel would love to hear those. She says them often.
Seriously, I mean, that's been, and it's a real challenge.
Yeah.
So with 75 to 90, then there's
and there's a large swing happening in the funding for our contracts in DEVA. A significant up on the general fund side of $2.9 million, and then a $12 million down on the federal fund line. When I got there at the end of May and we closed the year at the end of June, it was apparent that there was something off in the base budget of the contract line in our admin budget. And that's because, as I discovered, the general fund portion for contracts had been held constant for reasons I just had. There's not really a good reason why it had. It's just much turnover in the CFO position, probably some misunderstandings. But we had to push some of the contract costs into 24, and we had to have money transferred into the budget to close our admin budget for 23. And so through the late summer and fall, we dug in and you know, understood the right funding by the right funding sources for the array of contracts that we have in DEVA. And that's what you're seeing in this.
Is that cleanup?
Is that cleanup, that true up. So, and you will see it again when we get to 25 because this is truing up midway through 24 and we have to true up and get the base correct in 25. So that's the big piece that's happening in the admin line. And then there's also $600,000 that's coming into our admin line for the specific MDWAS project. As you may recall, 3.8 was added by the legislature, first by the governor and by the legislature when he passed the budget just last year for this project. And the first phase of this project, which is the data lake, is going very well. We're very
All right,
pleased
that's a new one, a data lake.
Yeah.
So what is the lake? I love this terminology. We don't orient anymore, we onboard. It's not my responsibility, it's not in my wheelhouse. Space, I love all the terminology.
the buzzwords.
So I was reading data lake, now that is a new one.
So the lake is, the data lake
Is it
is,
deep?
I'm sorry?
Is it deep? Is it wide?
It's definitely wide. It is bringing all the raw data from very many different sources into one place where it can be brought up to what's going to be the data warehouse and then be analyzed properly. And so when you think about all that
in the lake.
when you think about the lake, it's bringing in data from Gainwell, data from our PBM, data from several of our programs that are in different locations. And what we're working on now is bringing it all into one place where it can be matched and properly arranged. And that's what, with the contractor Deloitte that we have on, is happening in a staged fashion right now. And that's, I think we're very positive about the progress of that. And then the next phase will be the warehouse and then the analytics tools on top of that, so that we can actually pull. And it's actually really important across the whole project.
Oh, I don't mean to minimize the importance of it,
Yeah.
but I love all the terminology that is permeating.
But I really do hope that it takes a lot of, the ability for us to do our administrative work once this is in place. It should be a vast improvement,
Clinical data improvement,
More
clinical
accurate.
outcome improvements.
Yeah.
Pretty soon,
and the functioning
water
of
funding.
on the clinical side and on the business side.
Their lake.
So that $600,000 is I view it as neutral. It was money that was not spent in the central office that went back to the general fund and is coming back to us. And it is a sizable project in total. At $48 million.
Yeah, and who's the contract with?
So the contract for the lake is with Deloitte, the building the lake is with the Deloitte. And then we are in the process of choosing the vendor on the warehouse, and that should start, that vendor should be onboarded by the spring, for late spring.
Okay, well, we're enlightened here.
$48 million for
Yeah.
a lake and a warehouse, not
Yeah.
bad.
What about dam safety? Don't you think that fits in here too? It could
Well,
be Medicaid match for that.
I was gonna say the exact same thing.
Well, I just,
Health and safety for that.
maybe an MCO investment. Oh, I mean,
Well, the development of this has actually got a very nice match rate.
Oh, enhanced match?
I think it's a 90-10 match rate.
Oh, that's sweet too.
Yeah.
All right,
So that's what's going on in our admin budget. And then we'll go to the big section of us, which is the program budget, which stretches across the 3 appropriations: the global commitment appropriation, the state-only appropriation, and the non-waiver appropriation. And Nolan is here, and you all know that it's a consensus process that we go through. And folks that are on the e-board will be taking up that motion next week.
yeah, what is that, when is our e-board meeting? It's not on my calendar.
It's 17th.
17?
17th, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'll have to dress up.
Can you,
Yes, center's here.
well, you're gonna get to the Brattleboro tree.
I will.
You're looking ahead.
I know, I'm trying to avoid lakes.
Dams, and water, and
water.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're down to number 4.
Well, caseload
No.
utilization,
Wait a minute,
somehow I
wait a
missed the
minute.
numbering, I just realized that should be 4, but somehow the number got knocked
Yeah,
off.
I was gonna say, I was looking. All right, so this of course is always a big one.
Yeah, this one's going down in total. Unfortunately, the general fund need is going up because it's the new adults, which we also get a 90-10 match on, is the Medicaid eligibility group that is declining the most under the unwind. It's declining more than we expected when we passed the budget, built the budget last year. And that means it doesn't save us a lot of general fund because of their high match rate. And we also have a few areas where the general fund is going up, slightly higher PMPMs in some areas. And that's why you see that what is unusual, that the signs are different between the total down, but the general fund state the pressure up. And I don't know if you want to go any more into the caseload. It's the, we go, represents the
So,
consensus picture.
Last year, when we built this budget,
Yeah.
we assumed that with the redeterminations, that caseloads would decline. And we built in sort of the one-time funding, anticipating that
So
reduction.
that actually started 2 years ago, and that's up in.
Is that impacting any of this?
So that doesn't really impact us. That's the way the financing up in the central office worked. And we did anticipate some decline. We were seeing sort of higher PMPMs, and obviously, I think the most important thing I say here is that it's still a very, until we get fully through the unwind, it just makes the budget, the forecasting for caseload and PMPMs harder. And so the margin of error is, probably larger in the caseload and utilization for our projections right now. And that was the case last year as well. That was before we started the unwind. It's probably a little bit safer now because we're halfway through the unwind, and that's what we are looking at. But it's unusual to see this.
So what was HAU staff doing when we weren't doing any redeterminations?
We're gonna look at Addie.
Well, I mean, I assume we didn't have a reduction in staff.
No,
Maybe
I think
a rhetorical question on my part.
Addie, the question is what were the HAU folks doing? I think we probably had some higher vacancy through we're at a lower vacancy now, and I think we probably had some higher vacancy at the time through the pandemic, but
Yep. Sure, higher vacancy, but also many other eligibility activities that had to happen during the pandemic, like signing people up and processing changes, et cetera, et cetera. So even though renewals are a huge body of work, they're not the only function at HAU.
But the same staff is able to accommodate that work plus the redeterminations now.
Yeah, it
Added
is.
staff.
It's a challenge.
Oh. Yeah, particularly applied incomes.
Yeah, I think we'd be happy to come provide an update on how all that work is going, but we are
We
like
do get a
Stephanie said,
report in terms of the redeterminations periodically. Is that quarterly?
we post monthly reports, but I think we've sent specific legislative reports on roughly a quarterly cadence.
Right.
So moving on to what is number 4 listed on the narrative is the buy-in program, and this is both the buy-in program and the Medicare savings program. So the SLIMBs, QUIMBs, and QI1s, and this is the incremental change for the rate change in Medicare premiums that start in January for halfway through the year.
So this will have to be annualized.
Yeah, you will see this annualized when we get to the big budget in 25. Pretty much the same situation with clawback. We get told by the federal government what they are clawing back from us. And if anyone has a question about clawback, happy to answer, but I think you're all very familiar with how the federal government financed the Medicare Part D, in part, the Medicare Part D benefit almost 20 years ago now. Then we have a couple net neutral moves.
So this is the one we just talked about.
Yeah.
From the health department.
Yeah, so the family planning services are going to be paid out of DIVAs as claims out of the MMIS. So it's net neutral, and you probably, if you've had the health department in, you'll see the
Yeah,
down in theirs and the up in ours. And the safety net investments, these are just internal to us. They were in the GC appropriation. They belong in the state only appropriation because they're an investment, a GC investment. And that's for, you know, basically covering
We do
emergency.
have a report as well on GC investments, that we get.
You do.
Yeah.
And then I'm just noting here, there's no dollars associated with it, but it happens every year, is the rate alignment with Medicare. You know, just to have our Medicaid rates stay neutral, so they're not, since they're aligned with Medicare, we bring them back to where they're as close to neutral as we can have them, so that our providers aren't facing changes in our rates.
Money with aid, there's no money with aid.
There is no money, because we are keeping them neutral. This is the rates schedules that get adjusted every year to keep aligned with Medicare. And we try to do that in a budget neutral way. It's just that we're just noting that the activity happens in January every year.
You're just trying to confuse us.
Well, sometimes you do hear from your providers, that, you know, if they're not, that they're hearing something's changing, and, you know, so
There have been times when there've been Medicare reductions.
Yep.
And
we change and keep ours at what it was. We try to keep it at what it was previously, so that they're not
getting hit twice.
And when they're up, we're not necessarily keeping up because of our budget. You're not letting that flow through on our formulas. Maybe that's not quite the right way to say it, but let's see, we've got to 8, we're on number 9. So 9 and 10 and 11 are additions midway through the year. Breast pump supplies, we always have covered breast pumps, but we have not covered the supplies, and that's out of, basically out of alignment with recommendations from HRSA and from CMS. And so starting now in January, we're covering the supplies, and the bulk of this expenditure are the storage baggies for new mothers.
So you can remind me what CMS?
The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Is the federal?
Used to be HICVA. Long time ago.
You can remember that.
Oh.
When did it become CMS?
Wow.
Number 10 is the adjustment to the FQHC and RHC rates for the Medicare Economic Index, going up 4.6% starting. It'll be applied in February, and that will also be annualized. You'll see when we get to the big bill. And this is on top of the, you know, when you pass the budget, 10% started in July, and this is in addition to that.
Now you're aware of the study that was requested. Yeah, that's millions of dollars to go to a cause base.
That has
There is a study?
I think House Healthcare asked for it. If you can't, we gave them a higher rate. The 10% came from here. And so sometimes if you can't give money, you give a study, you know how it is.
Yeah.
We have a number of those out there.
Is there a federal requirement for reimbursement for FQHCs that we are not following? That's what I've heard. Is that true or false?
We are not in agreement that we are gotcha out of line.
Well, this would help to know.
With who
What
are
the
you not?
differences of opinion are, because I've been hearing that we are not following federal law.
And we discussed that with our joint meeting with the commissioner at the time, Andrea.
Yeah, you're next.
Oh, good,
I
okay.
remember, I think you were here, and I raised that question.
Yes,
For me, and what?
I think Senator Mine's not even remote.
Oh, maybe. And I raised that question because I've heard the same
Yeah,
allegation that we were not complying with the federal reimbursement. And
well, I mean, if it's
and at that-
ambiguous, yeah.
And at that point, we were told by the commissioner at the time that that was not a point of agreement, that the department's position was that that reimbursement was in compliance, so.
I think they're here tomorrow.
Yes, well, they're having a coffee or a card
Yeah,
room,
Yeah,
presence.
I'm
Yeah,
meeting
they're
with
coming to
someone
my
I
committee
think
tomorrow morning.
12:15. So I'd love to be able to answer these questions,
You can't, because anything would be in the 25 budget, and we don't know.
and we just don't know what the governor's doing.
And there are ongoing conversations between our department by state and that FQHCs individually. And so we continue to try to work through some of these points of disagreement.
With
Okay,
respect to
thank you.
Senator Sanders, he seems to take credit for everything that goes on in that page.
Well, he does.
Yeah, so what role do we have?
Well, we pay. But there's federal funding too, that go into the FQHCs. And, I mean, so he's been a strong proponent of that.
Yeah,
And the
Yeah,
expansion.
they do have
And I think they
that.
provide, what, about 60% of all primary
Yes.
care in the state? And not just Medicaid, but just
No,
overall.
no.
I think
That was a surprise to me when I was involved, you know, in looking at the report, is the mix across the state of the FQHCs in terms of their payer mix.
yeah, no, it's quite broad because, yeah. So, all right, well, good luck with your meeting tomorrow. I'm sure their position is the
well,
payment,
I'm glad we
is
had
violating
this
the law.
discussion today. Yeah.
Who is it that's saying that we're,
The
FQHCs
FQHCs are taking the position that, we are not complying with the federal reimbursement requirements. But there's a difference of opinion, and their opinion is they should be paid more.
right, yeah, not surprising.
I should be clear.
Well, that's my opinion too. I think everybody should be paid.
And just a reminder, this is the FQHCs and RHCs, even though the RHCs aren't part of bi-state, we treat them the same.
On that, rural,
Rural health.
I mean, the judiciary wants more, states attorneys want more, attorney general wants more.
Everybody wants more.
And I haven't heard anybody say I want less.
No, and anybody sitting here knows that. And we anticipate a very difficult budget presentation. I will tell you, you don't need to declare anything right now, but if you're trying to reduce the amount of the cost of your 5% stabilization reserve, you have scraped the barrel. And we're hearing that as a proposal in the BAA. You may not, but you're familiar with the state based on prior year spending. So instead of a direct appropriation, we're open. The proposal is to do a transfer, and therefore that transfer for debt service, 75 million, would not be subject to the 5% stabilization reserve requirement. And you don't even need to comment because you're working for that branch. But we didn't even do that in 2010. So it just shows you how difficult and how every hidey hole has been looked at in building the budget that we're going to get. So I think Senator Sears, probably the expectations are going to exceed what we are able to but we know you'll do your best.
I will. I mean, there's a fence around the Fort Bennington Monument waiting
We're gonna sell the Bennington Monument.
Right?
Well, I think we should sell the Bennington
To
Monument.
New York, where the
Yeah.
battle was fought.
Yeah.
and all that.
Yeah, but, and now we're down to Brattleboro Retreat, so let's.
The hospice rates just have a little tick up to stay in compliance, and now we're at the Brattleboro retreat, which is a change.
This is an administrative mess, and that's typical. Not you, but we've been going through, as you know, every time the retreat comes up, something else is odd there.
So the retreat has become much more stable. They still have that in their financial reports, a very, but we pay them on a
patient mix.
This is the
I understand that, but if this happened at someplace else, we'd be going bonkers. But it happens at the retreat, year after year, for 32 years, I've seen this stuff.
Yeah, but it's only because of you, we don't know bunkers. We want you to have this money.
This is
I don't
basically.
know, I mean,
higher, more forensic patients and more longer stays than we anticipated when we built the budget. It's not
Who's
total.
responsible for that?
Well, we all are when we're using
Society.
estimates and building the budget.
But
I
also,
understand
but also
that,
the forensic patients come in, those are the court assigned ones.
So
We
it's
have-
all, because the courts are apparently functioning and moving more cases through, you see, it's there.
No, they said they're backlogged.
And then we cannot match.
They need more money to clear up their backlog.
We cannot match stays that are longer than 60 days. For any date, you know, if the
So
stay
this
is
is
60
why
days,
it's,
yeah.
Why it's all general fund.
It's not, we're not increasing how much we're paying the retreat. It's what we can draw a match on for the folks that are in the retreat. The retreat is not getting more money because of this budget adjustment. It is internal to our accounting that is the issue.
Does that make you feel better?
Yeah, it's just
Okay.
general fund, it's 2.4 million, we don't have to do something else.
No, it's just we're optimistic on how much Medicaid we could draw.
Then the House is spending something today on something that governor will veto anyway, but
Are you talking about safe injection site?
yes, I think it's about that amount.
Harm reduction.
Oh, pardon me, sorry. That's right up there with data lake and onboarding, sorry. I need to get reprogrammed in our lines. Oh, what was that again? Harm reduction. All right, so this is a big one.
Yes, number 13 is a large one. And I'm going to let Alicia Cooper describe this one.
And how, you know, with so many variables, I find it a challenge of how you attribute what savings are generated by the ACO versus Blueprint versus any other, other strategies that we might have invested in. So this is, the amount is negotiated, obviously, it's contractual. Did you do this?
Yes, so I'll provide a little bit of an overview. I know that this committee has some familiarity with our ACO program. DEVA has contracted with One Care Vermont since 2017 for this program, and 2022 performance year, which runs on a calendar year basis, is the settlement that we're talking about now. On an annual basis, we will contract with the ACO. We will establish an agreed upon price for the total cost of care for a defined population of attributed Medicaid members. Over time, the attributed population has grown. So we started with a relatively small population in 2017. And in the 2022 performance year, we had approximately 126,000 Vermont Medicaid members for whom the ACO and its participating providers were taking financial accountability.
That was by design to slowly expand that.
Yes, we started with, it was voluntary provider participation. So there were a number of communities that were interested in participating in the first year. We saw that grow from 4 communities to 10 communities, and then we reached all communities effectively. And so we've been operating now for several years with all communities participating. We've seen the population steadily increase, both as a result of more providers participating. Medicaid.
Not the other payers.
The other payer populations have moved in different directions over the years, and I'm probably not the best person to speak to some of those, but for the Medicaid program, we have seen sort of steady increases. Some of the increases that we were seeing in the sort of 2021 through 2023 time period were also related to the Medicaid continuous coverage requirements. So we had people that were staying on our Medicaid rolls rather than being redetermined on a rolling basis as they had been in the earlier years of the program. So we agree on a price for the total cost of care for the population. We developed this in conjunction with actuaries, and then the actuarial rate is also reviewed by the Green Mountain Care Board. So it's a fairly involved process with a lot of points of input. And then at the end of the year, we compare the actual total cost of care to that agreed upon price. And there are risk corridors around the financial performance. So if the ACO's actual total cost of care is in excess of that agreed upon price, The provider organizations that are participating bear some financial risk. And if it's under the agreed upon price, they have the potential to essentially retain some portion of what was not spent and distribute to
Has
their
that ever
network
happened?
providers.
Is that the latter example?
Yes, we've had years with both directions. And for the 2022 performance year that we're talking about now, the actual was lower than the expected or agreed upon price. As you can see in the narrative, we've broken this $11.9 million gross number into two component parts. The first part is about $6.16 million, and that's the difference around that sort of actual and expected total cost of care for which we have an obligation to the ACO per our contracts. And just to put that in context, that's $6 million of a reconciliation payment on an overall agreed upon price of about $330 million. So it's relatively small and within what we were anticipating. The other component of the reconciliation, which is approximately $5.73 million, relates to a more, I'd say, technical component of how we operationalize the program. And this is because of the continuous coverage requirement that we had as Medicaid meant that members who were enrolled with Medicaid were not changing from one eligibility group to another eligibility group. And that is most important in this example when we think about individuals who were children and who would otherwise have aged into adult aid categories. We pay different rates to the ACO for children and for adults, and our system makes those payments on an automated basis based on an individual's aid category. So anyone who is over the age of 18 would be eligible for an adult payment. Because we weren't making updates to the designation of individuals' eligibility categories, we had a number of 19, 20, and 21-year-olds who were still looking like children to our system, but who were effectively adults for the purposes of this
So is it
contract.
interplay between that and the attributed savings? Because we're paying on one side, but in calculating the attributed savings by Medicaid eligibility group, is there some adjustment that had to be made on the savings side?
Yes, we had to make adjustments to the expected total cost of care or agreed upon price to make sure that aligned with the composition of the population that was attributed. So if it had looked like we had more children, but effectively they should have been adults, we had to adjust both the calculation of the target, the expected total cost of care, and sort of make up for essentially payments that we weren't making throughout the course of the year because our system automates it based on the aid category. So I think the one other thing I would note is that we're expecting some element of this also to be present in the reconciliation for the 2023 performance year.
It's just, at least haven't completed the redetermination.
Precisely.
What's that mean?
Review, eligibility reviews.
Yeah, I
We've
know,
been-
but so will we have to add more
Yeah, that's
BAA?
no, probably in the budget, it'll catch up.
25 budget.
Yeah,
We have to do we'll end up doing the 23 reconciliation.
in the town will come in
That will be-
25.
Well, when we're in the budget adjustment next year, that will be,
He'll catch up with this.
Yeah.
It's that tail.
Okay.
Because the redeterminations are really occurring over a fairly long period of time. How, 2 years? 1 year?
They started in April,
April.
and then we should be done in July, so a little bit longer than a year.
Yeah, okay.
So
It's 2 years.
next year. So,
So that's the last piece of money moving in the budget adjustment for us. And then I've noted two other items here. One is the 12-month continuous enrollment of children. This is a federal policy that's instituted right now. We do think this has a modest price tag, but it doesn't actually have a fiscal budgetary impact because we have the baseline for our building of the budget has been a term of continuous enrollment. And so we don't think that, it will have an actual budgetary impact, given where we're starting from with the caseloads.
Because de facto, we were doing it anyway.
And what this means is that in between the redetermination period for a child is if their family income went up, they would not come off Medicaid until they were a full year into their, through the full term of that enrollment, and then in a redetermination, and the family income would indicate that.
Yeah, that's been a recommendation for a while to make sure children's coverage remains.
And then the last item noted here is the global payment program. The current contract with the ACO allows for this potential or this pilot program to pick up the portion of expenditure that is fee for service still outside of the ACO for attributed lives. We internally, because it's a very modest cost for the independent primary care practices, are starting that for the independent primary care practices. For this to be broader, we would have to find funding, because it takes one-time funding to bridge the tail of the claims. And that's in anticipation of testing for
So
what will hopefully be a more robust.
This would give more predictability in terms of
It
revenue, maybe?
that's the goal of the global payment. I mean, this is the modest program that we're doing now is basically a test and experimenting with, the voluntary primary care practices that want to join in anticipation of the federal ahead model. So it gives us an ability to look at what that looks like in working, for at least in this format.
On the pilot, what are we talking about for a number of independent providers here?
I think there are 12 or 14 of them. Yeah.
The hospital, current hospital and independent.
So we internally, we can only bridge the one-time money for the independent practices, because that's very, very, very modest compared to the hospital.
Yeah.
Other questions? For Eva? Then, what I will do then is adjourn and go off for today, and we'll, tomorrow, we have